Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. So excited that you've joined us for Home Sweet Homecast, episode 9. How you feeling, Mom?
This is the podcast. I love that you said that. That's pretty fun. Welcome back to the podcast.
You know,
That's
we're a
cool.
big deal.
Your own minds, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yes, yes, yes.
We have lots of things in store today. We are continuing basically, we call it like a series that we've been doing. So this is part 2, part 3, kind of a both and for how to get your home sold. And so we're talking each and every week about different parts of the process of selling your home. And so today we're basically jumping in, about halfway through, more or less, than how you're getting it sold. Wouldn't you say, Mom?
So yeah, I'm excited because this is like the finale, right? This is the finale.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a good one. Okay. Well, then if you're cool with it, do you have any market updates you want to jump in with real quick?
We're just seeing the continued warming of the market.
Yeah.
We're just seeing that, and buyers are just getting more and more accustomed to these interest rates. So
Yep.
each week, we're just seeing more buyers jump in the market. That is starting, of course, to heat up um, the properties and the multiple offers. So the competition is starting to heat up again. Not to the degree it was, but we are seeing that every week, just a little bit more as we
Yeah.
approach spring break.
Yep.
So, yep, here comes the season.
That's right. Buying season is here and selling season too. So people got to get in the new spot before the new school year, I think seems to be one of the biggest drivers for sure that we encounter, but lots of different
Yeah.
reasons. Well, let's jump in. So what did we talk about last week? Do you want to summarize that real quick, Mom? Get us up to
Yeah. So,
speed. Just
yeah, absolutely. So last week we talked about, again, it was about selling your home, and we were talking a little bit more about the process. And last week we talked about, negotiations and how that works. Also, along with that, open houses and showings. We talked about handling those kind of situations and what you could expect from people coming in the home, and how to get your house ready for all that. So, yeah, this week we're going to talk a little bit more about the next part of the selling process, which is going through escrow, is what they call it in some states. It's when we call it contract to close. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more this evening or today, and then kind of go from there.
Yep. Sounds good. All right. Well, then let's jump in. Basically, I think this is probably one of the biggest things, whether you're buying or selling, and that's the inspection. That's kind of step
Yeah,
one in this, and that's really where you see things. It's the calm before the storm, if there's going to be a storm. So the
absolutely.
inspectors come in, they look at the property, and they give the buyer, usually this person paying for it, the report and things like that. And they let the buyers know, and they essentially, not intentionally by any means, but give them ammunition to then bring to you, the seller, and say, okay, here's what we want, right, and here's what we want to go to bat for. So that begins the negotiation process we mentioned last week.
Right, right. And, the inspectors have a set system that they go through when they do their inspections. And so they call out everything. Even if the property is not up to code, they still call it out, even though you're not required to bring a property up to code to
Yep.
sell it.
Yep. Yeah. So you
So
see
they
that
will
with like,
call, yeah,
no, go
yeah,
ahead.
they will call it, they'll call that out. And, one of the top disputes in real estate is when a seller doesn't disclose defects or things that they
Yeah.
know about the property in an attempt to, want the buyer to pay more for it or to get an offer. So it's really important that a seller fill out a seller's disclosure form, and that they're real open about everything they know about the property, because that keeps you from getting sued later on.
Yep. Which will cost you more money than the money you were trying to hide by just doing that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Always.
Yep.
Always does. It always
My
ends
gosh.
messy, doesn't it? Ends messy, messy, messy.
Right.
So we don't like to see those. So we like to make
Right.
sure our sellers tell what they need to. So
Yep.
yeah, the inspection, and the inspection report, those are like 40 pages long. That's just a regular one. So they're very, very detailed. And it's at this point that we usually use a formula. It's called the BCW formula. It stands for broken, cosmetic, or worn Do you want to talk about that, Jackson?
Well, I mean, yeah, I have never actually heard it described as that. So that's I've never heard you use that particular phrase with this, but I love that because that's great. And it's
Yes.
honestly it's pretty self-explanatory. So like, if things are broken, let's go into detail about that. So, for example, one of the open houses I did last weekend had a window that was shattered in the back of the house.
Hmm.
That is something we would describe as broken. That window does not function. It is
Right.
letting in bugs, it is
Yeah.
letting in cold air, it's doing all those kinds of things, right? And so that would be a broken category. However, something that in same category of thing in a home, let's say that the windows are just fogged up, right? The windows have maybe
Hmm.
lost their seal, and you can begin to start seeing some of that vapor basically getting in between the window panes.
Hmm.
And so in that situation, that is a function piece, right? Because you know that the seal's out, but it also leans a little more towards the cosmetic side because technically the window's still there. Technically, the window still
Hmm.
functions, right?
Right.
And does something. May not do that as what it could do and what it should do, maybe, but it does. It still is functioning somehow, right?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
we almost call that even a little bit worn.
totally.
And with anything that's worn, like if the AC system is old, but it's still functioning, what we really look for at that is not to have to replace the entire system, but really just to do some kind of a credit, maybe
Yeah.
for the depreciation on the system.
Yeah.
So, and it's all about, to me, it's all about this becoming a successful part of the closing process whenever the agents have really set realistic
Yeah.
expectations.
Totally.
So, the seller's agent needs to set expectations about, hey, there are going to be some things that come up. And, we want to make sure that we are, amenable to working this out. And then with the buyer, we need to make sure they understand that this is a used home and that it's not going to be perfect, and prepare them so that they're not shocked and they don't ask for every little thing to be repaired.
Yeah, and for example of one of those things I think about, like, is paint. Like, let's say the
Yeah.
buyer just doesn't like the paint color, and if they request you to change the paint color as a seller, like, that's a cosmetic thing. That is not
Right.
important. That is purely just them trying to do their preferences. And in our opinion, unless you just are like, actually, I was going to do that anyways, or something weird like that. I mean, in a weird case scenario, then you do it. But otherwise, we will always recommend. There's no reason to do that.
Hmm.
And we would tell the buyers that as well on that side is like, hey, like paint's one of the cheaper things you can do to your home
Yep.
to upgrade it and to make it the way you want to make it. So um, I think about paint as a cosmetic thing. It's something that's also that can
Mhm.
be cosmetic that can also be indicative of a bigger thing. So it kind of goes both ways. And inspectors are great about pointing this stuff out, but are just like cracks. I mean, in Texas we have
Yeah.
so many
Oh,
settling
yeah.
cracks. It is just a
Yeah.
thing in Texas homes. And so we have all of these, and the cracks get bigger in some seasons, and the cracks get smaller in some seasons, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes that's a foundational thing. Sometimes that's purely cosmetic and just caused from the age of the home and the settling of the foundation in the space that it's in, right? And so I
Absolutely.
think of that as another one. Obviously, it's nice if the seller wants to. You patch those things up. That's a very kind thing and paint over it. That's very
Right.
kind of them to do. But if it's just a cosmetic thing and the inspection report didn't indicate any sort of indication that that is, an indicator of something bigger, right? There's
Mhm.
really no reason to do that. It's just purely cosmetic, and it didn't look great, but it's not causing you any problems in the home. So
Right. Right. Yep. And there'll be things like that that the buyer may ask for, but we kinda look at it like, if it's cosmetic, that means they saw it when they walked through before they put the offer in, and so they knew about it before they put the offer in, and so, depending on, of course, what the offer is. So, if it's a 20,000 above list kind of an offer, well, you might do many of the things. If it's a, 5,000 below list, well, you might not wanna do any of the things. So,
right, totally,
we take some of that into consideration, but, the cosmetic thing, generally, no, nothing.
yeah.
We don't recommend that.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And
Yeah.
then the rest of it is really just negotiations, right? So even as we talk about
Yeah.
negotiations, we mentioned this last week, but, like, just to make the note here, even in like, those negotiations are not if the buyer's requesting this, right? Um, this repair to be done and saying that we want this done, there are 3 options in that situation. You, the seller, can just frankly say no, and I'm not going to do that.
Mhm.
You, the seller,
Mhm.
can give money towards that to not actually do it yourself, but to pay, a fee or knock off money from the deal, whatever, to make room for that. Or you can just go ahead and do the repair yourself, or get a
Mhm.
contractor, obviously, to come in and do it. Um, those are kind of your options in that situation. So you've got a couple different ways to play it. Never think that you have to do something. It just is more about it. I would term that, I would think of that in terms of how eager you are to get out of the home. If you are very
Right.
eager to get out of the home and get to your new spot, then you probably want to be a little more amenable to the asks and things like that,
Mhm.
within reason, of course, not giving them everything or whatever. But if you've got time and you were selling and you're approaching it in a not speedy kind of way, then maybe you don't deal with that, and maybe you go through another option, period again. Maybe another offer comes in. You do have to start considering days on market at that point, because that
Mhm.
kind of becomes a thing that works against you, in the long term. So those are all things. Those are all nitty gritty details that we can talk about later,
Mhm.
but just
Right.
things to keep in
And they
mind
come into
with those.
play.
Yeah, they do. They
Yeah,
always
they
do.
come into play.
So, but yeah,
Yeah,
so
for
that's the
sure.
inspection.
Well, and we talk about too with the inspection that once you get through that option period, which is a number of days, it's anywhere from 3 to 7 days. Once you get through that, and that's when the inspection's done and any repairs are negotiated, then you're probably about 89% done. Like, you're 89% to the finish line at that
Yeah,
point. The
yeah,
chances of something falling apart at that point are, get less likely as you go along.
yeah,
So that's a good place to be. So the next step is the appraisal.
yep.
So that is our next hurdle. We talk about 3 hurdles. So the first hurdle is the inspection option period, second hurdle is the appraisal. So the appraisal is when
So essentially, this is the lender's way of ensuring that their investment in the buyer is legit. Mom, what do you think about appraisals? What do people need to know about appraisals?
So, a couple of things is that, an agent can do an appraisal package for the appraiser. So, you can actually the agent can put together a list of all the amenities, maybe the money that was spent on the amenities. Can also talk about in that some of the comparable sales that they want the appraiser to consider. So, that's a great thing for an agent to do as an appraisal package to help get that done. Appraisers, they do, 8, 9 appraisals a day sometimes. So, they are running and gunning, and sometimes, especially some kind of an unusual kind of a sale or usual property, they might need a little bit of hand-holding or a little bit of assistance, and they usually appreciate that,
Yeah,
because we may know the neighborhood or the area or the property better than they would know it.
right.
So, that's something else that we can do.
Yeah, that's great. Yep. Your agent's very helpful sometimes. Most of the time. It should be all the time.
Yes. Yeah, well, an agent can advocate for you so
Yeah.
well with all of these different processes. So that's one
Yep.
thing too. The other thing to think about appraisal is that is another place where there might be a chance for a negotiation,
Mhm.
because if an appraisal comes back lower than the purchase price, then at that point there's 3 options, right? The seller can come down on the price to the appraised value. The buyer can bring extra money to the closing table to make up the difference,
Yeah.
or they can negotiate it somewhere in between.
Yeah. Yep. Yep, that's, so because there's basically, if you catch that, there's basically money missing in the deal, and so somebody has to come up
Right.
with that. If you're offering 250, if you're offering 450, whatever the number is, if you're offering 450 and the appraisal comes back at 440, there's 10K missing. Somebody's gotta figure out that, or the contract, or people can get out of the contract, right? So,
Mhm.
or the buyer rather
Yeah,
can do that.
the lender won't be able to make the loan if somebody
Right,
doesn't make up the difference,
right.
yeah.
Yep.
Which is why we love cash deals, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't gotta worry about that. Yeah, it's big.
Yeah,
But speaking of loans, so loans go through 4 phases. So the buyer's loan goes through 4 phases. You have pre-approval, which is basically a general approval for that buyer based on their credit and a bunch of other stuff, their income, those things. Once you've gotten from pre-approval, you go through this process called underwriting. So underwriting is actually the loan happening and the loan getting processed for that specific property. So it goes from the general to the specific. And then from there, you get to loan approval, which is basically what comes next in this process. So we're waiting for the buyer's loan to get approved so that we
Mhm.
know we're headed towards closing.
Right.
And then once you get to closing,
Yep.
is phase four of the loan after the closing table, which is funding. So we'll get to that in here in just a second. But
Absolutely. Yeah, and what we're looking for with the lender getting all of their underwriting done is we want the buyer to be totally approved, and then we also want the property to be approved. So the buyer, they're looking for things like what you just said. They're looking for, W-2 statements, tax statements, account balances, printouts from your account. That's to confirm the buyer can do this deal.
right.
But then on the property side, they're looking for an appraisal, a survey. They've got to have the HOA, Homeowner Association documents. They also have to have the title commitment, which is the title commitment is the insurance commitment that shows that there's clear title.
Yep.
So then all of that documentation goes through underwriting. And if all of it's stamped approved and everything's fine, then the buyer has a clear to close.
Yep. Which is a pretty exciting moment because again, it's one
Yes,
step
it
closer.
is.
You went from
Yeah.
85% to 90%, or even actually, I mean, really, you probably went from 85 to like 95, really, at this point.
Oh, yeah,
So,
for sure. As soon as you got that clear to close,
yeah,
you're like
yeah,
99%
you're
done.
almost
It's
done.
pretty
Yeah,
yeah, it's rare that something falls out or that something unusual happens. It can happen, but it's very rare.
yep. All right. Well, and then we get to the closing table and we get to the closing process, really, because that was the bulk of like the escrow process and getting things
Mhm.
to the title company that title company needs to get this thing closed. And so now we get to the closing process. So that begins kind of with the final walkthrough. So the buyers are given a chance to come to the home and make sure, basically what we tell buyers to look for at this time is that things that were supposed to be a part of the deal are still in the house, right? So if the refrigerator was included, if you were leaving the refrigerator as the seller,
Mhm.
then they want to make sure the refrigerator is still there and it hasn't gone missing. If
Right.
there was a awesome, I don't know, built-in maybe or something like that, um, that you didn't, rip that off the wall and take it with you, kind of thing, because they assumed that was part of
Mhm.
the deal. So there are
Right.
things like that they're looking for, and they're just making sure that nothing's really changed since they first saw the home
Mhm.
through the process. Because
Yeah.
at this point, it's been 20, 25 days probably since they've seen the home. So, I mean, it's around that.
Mhm.
What else
Well,
are
and,
they looking for, Mom?
In Texas, we have polar vortexes, we have thunderstorms, we have hailstorms. So that
Go
final
Texas.
walkthrough, you could just, you can, yeah, wait, it's going to change, right? The weather's going to change. So, you want to look at that property before you go sign the documents just to make sure like some big limb didn't fall on the roof and, cave in the roof. So all the things, especially on unoccupied properties. So that's part of the reason for that. And
Yeah.
we've had stories of people backing moving vans into the garage and they come to the closing table and don't tell anybody. So yeah. So
Jeez.
it's a good thing to do a walkthrough.
Yeah, well, and you're also checking for repairs, right? Because a big part of this process has been the
Yeah.
negotiated
Yeah.
repairs. So if you're the buyer, you're checking to make sure repairs were done. Sellers, you
Yeah.
really at this point should be pretty much just chilling. Right? You've probably gotten your stuff packed up at this point. You're ready to get out, unless you have a lease back, which we'll talk about here in a second. But you're checking for repairs. Sellers, you want to make sure your repairs I mean, I would say done before this. Technically, they don't have to be done before
Yeah.
this. They have to be done before the closing, when you're actually like
Mhm.
closing in that kind of process, because that's when it transfers. But it's better if you can get it done by this point. One, because you then are, you have less to worry about. You can actually, enjoy the rest of this process. But I think two, it just gives the buyer some peace of mind. That just helps add good faith to the process, right? And add good vibes, if you will, to the process. So,
Yeah. Yeah. A buyer wants to walk through and feel like that the property's about to be theirs and it's in
yep,
good shape. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah. It helps
yep,
tremendously. So yeah, I think that's all the process, and those are the main three steps. Those are three hurdles that we're looking for people to get through with the contract to close process.
yep,
And then, of course, at closing, typically the seller and the buyer do not sign at the same
correct.
table. They have separate appointments and they sign separately. And then once each party has signed the documents, then they're gathered up and they're sent over to the lender, and then the lender looks them over, make sure they have everything. If they have everything the way they want it, then they'll send the wire for the loan, and that money will go to the title company. And then at that point, we all get a phone call from the title company, and it says, "Congratulations, you have sold your house." So that's when we're really excited at that point, because you officially no longer own that home. You can cancel your homeowner's insurance, and all those things. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, you get paid. You've done it. You get
yeah,
paid. You get the money you want. You get to move on to your next thing. You are free in that way. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. You have sold your house.
yeah. So the only thing that would be different to that, so the buyer usually at this time would take possession. They would move in. They'd begin
Mhm,
their move-in process. There is a thing called a lease back. So technically, as part of the offer, you as a seller may not want to be out just yet, just based on if your new job is starting a month later after you close, things like that. And so this is the opportunity to do a lease back. And so the lease back would kick in at this point if you had negotiated that, where basically the buyer says, "Hey, I'm going to lease this property back to you because they now own it." And so they're going to let you
mhm,
stay in it while until you need, obviously within reason. And you would know all of that because that would be negotiated up front.
right.
Usually, your agent would let the buyer's agent know that, hey, they need a lease back for X amount of days up until this date or whatever. So that'd be the only thing that would
Yeah.
would would be a caveat basically to this, but all of that would be in writing. All of that would be covered. It could be a free lease back. There could be basically a rent that's paid during that process, just depending on whatever was negotiated during that time. So
Mhm. Yeah, and you're going to take care of your utilities being turned off or transferred depending on when you give possession.
mhm.
So if you're given possession at the closing table, that's the day, then you keep your utilities on all the way until the end of that day.
Yeah,
If you're not going to give it up until, you've had a week lease back or something like that, you do it at the very end of your lease back.
yeah,
So that keeps the water heaters running, it keeps the AC running, it keeps the water sprinklers running, it keeps the house working. You don't want the house to stop working before it closes.
yeah.
So and that is in the contract that you will keep the utilities on until it closes. So that's part of it too. And there's just really good etiquette about how to leave a home when you move out. So you want to think, how would I want to move into a home if it was me moving in? So if you can kind of get into the buyer's shoes with that, then that'll help you leave it the way you'd want it to be left.
I wanted to ask you about this though. When I saw that we were talking about this point today, I thought this would be interesting for people. Um, obviously, you should do I think about the biggest part of it is like you should patch holes from your pictures in the walls and just touch
Hmm.
up spots and things like that. My question though, because I don't actually know the answer, is do you have to do that? And if you don't, are there any things you leave yourself open to within the contract for liabilities, if that makes sense?
So you have to guarantee that the home will be left in the way that the buyer found it that when they put the offer in.
Hmm.
So that is a part of the contract. So if you have trees die or something like
Sure.
that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
something large,
Yeah.
then you have to restore those
Yeah.
because that's the way, or credit them some money because that is the way that the buyer bought the property,
Right.
right, when they put the offer. But as far as when it gets down to the nitty gritty of that, a lot of times agents will put into the offer, into the agreement, the specifics of what they want. So, all holes to be patched and painted with matching paint,
Yeah.
if that's what they want, or the TV mount removal will be patched and painted. All trash and debris will be removed from the property.
Yeah.
So, there's some things you can put into the specifics of the offer. So, and that would be something, of course, that you would know from the beginning when you
Exactly.
went under a contract.
Yeah. It'd be in the
So,
contract.
but as far as the basics, it's more just, leaving it in clean, broom swept kind of shape,
Yeah.
and removing all of the items that you're supposed to take with
Yeah.
you. So,
Yep. And then
so
you're
yeah.
done. And then you've done it.
And then you're done. Yeah, and of course, it's always wonderful as a
Yeah.
seller, depending on if this is something you have. But if you have access to a lot of vendors, pool people, lawn people, housekeepers, things like that, it's always wonderful to leave a list of those for your buyer.
Yes.
That's just a great, great thing to do. I can tell you that the more that you can generate goodwill then if things do come up that are odd with the house after they move in those first few weeks, you're much less likely to get a phone call or to get an email or something where they're wanting you to pay for something, where they're
Yep.
wanting you to make good for something
Yeah.
if you've left a really great experience for them at the closing. So
Yeah.
it may take a little extra time and may take a little bit extra work, but usually it's worth it for those kind of situations where something pops up. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many times that people move into a home and like the laundry, the washer connection has leaked everywhere.
Oh
So
gosh.
that's
Oh.
not unusual. That happens, that and the ice maker hose
Oh.
in the kitchen. Those are notorious for people thinking they had them off or thinking they had them capped, and then they're leaking. And so things like that are things you don't want a buyer to come back to you on.
Yeah. That's crazy. Mm.
So yeah, the more you can engender goodwill,
Yeah.
the better. And one of the things that we talk about between a buyer seller relationship,
Yeah.
that's really kind of a neat thing. There's like three types of relationships. One is, of course, adversarial, right? So that's the one we see the most, which is what's in it for me?
Mhm.
What am I going to get out of this
Yeah.
deal?
Yeah.
And it's me against you,
Right.
right? So then there's this second kind that's kind of called a barometric relationship, which is where you're kind of always testing. You're always waiting for the next foot to fall. You don't
Right.
really trust each other. You're always taking a read on what it's like, and always checking it out. So there's still not any trust there. There's not common goals or goodwill yet, but nothing bad's happened. So that kind of relationship is like on the edge. It can
Yeah.
go great
Yeah.
or it could go bad.
Yeah.
So then there's this last part, this is the last one that we really like, and the last one, it's called, what is that one? I just totally forgot.
You com
Complimentary,
Yeah,
that's what it
sorry.
is.
Complimentary.
Thank you. We talked about this. Yeah, this is complimentary. So
Yep.
this is when both sides are trying to go for a win-win. Both sides really, the seller really wants to sell the house and the buyer really wants to buy the house. And they're trying to cooperate together.
Yeah.
And those are great because lawsuits don't come out of those kind of
Right. Right.
situations. um, you know, people have goodwill. They keep up with each other. They let each other know about the neighbors like them. So there's that kind of situation too.
Mhm. Yeah, good stuff. And I feel like that's very counterintuitive for people, um, in this process. I feel like that's very, very,
Yeah,
different than the way it usually works. So, yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, cool. That's what we got for this week on Home Sweet Homecast, episode 9. So thankful, y'all, for joining us this week. We ask every single week, as always, if you want to like and subscribe, that's awesome. Helps us a lot with the
It is
interwebs
awesome.
so much. And then on top of that, just let us know what you're thinking about this in the comments. And if there's something you'd like us to revisit or talk about more in
Mhm.
depth, we'd be glad to do that anytime. But as always, we thank you for being here with us each and every week, and we will see you again next week.
Yes. See you soon.